Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to EERIE Echoes. Tonight, we set sail into the darkest waters with 7 disturbing true cruise ship horror stories. These aren't tea myths or legends. These are real accounts from passengers and crew who lived through unthinkable nightmares while trapped at sea, thousands of miles from any hope of escape. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to EERIE Echoes for daily true horror content that will haunt your nights, and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we dive into the abyss of human fear. Now, let's step aboard, because once you're on the open ocean, there's nowhere to run. It was the summer of 2016 when Denise and her husband Mark finally treated themselves to their first cruise together. They boarded the Carnival Victory in Miami, excited for a week of Caribbean sunshine. Like many first-time cruisers, they were amazed at how massive the ship was. 17 decks, multiple restaurants, bars, pools, and entertainment venues. It felt less like a boat and more like a floating city. The first few days were everything they'd hoped for. Denise loved the live shows and exploring the duty-free shops on board. Mark spent long hours in the casino, enjoying the thrill of blackjack and chatting with other passengers. They laughed, drank, and promised each other this would become a new tradition, an annual getaway to escape the stress of work and routine. But on the third night, that dream turned into something darker. Denise and Mark had dinner in the main dining room. She remembered how he ordered prime rib and joked with the waiter about getting a second portion. Afterward, they strolled through the promenade, holding hands, watching the endless stretch of dark ocean through the glass windows. By midnight, Denise was tired. She kissed Mark goodnight outside the casino. "Don't stay too late," she teased. "Tomorrow we're up early for Cozumel." Mark smiled and waved her off. "Just one more hand, I promise." She went back to their cabin on deck 8, starboard side, and fell asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship. When she woke at dawn, the bed beside her was cold and empty. At first, she wasn't alarmed. Maybe Mark had gone for a late-night drink or stayed out with new friends. But when she saw his phone and wallet on the dresser, unease began to creep in. He never left his things behind. She called the casino. The staff told her he'd cashed out his chips at around 12:45 a.m. He'd left alone, walking toward the outer decks. She searched the ship frantically, checking every bar, every lounge, even the smoking area he sometimes visited. Nothing. Finally, trembling, she called guest services. "My husband. He never came back to our cabin last night. I think something's wrong." Within minutes, 2 uniformed security officers were at her door. They asked calm but pointed questions. Had they argued? Did he drink heavily? Was it possible he had gone off with someone? Denise shook her head, fighting back tears. "No, he wouldn't just vanish. He's not that kind of man." Hours later, ship security reviewed the CCTV footage. At 12:47 a.m., Mark appeared leaving the casino, walking calmly toward Deck 10, the open-air deck that wrapped around the ship. His posture was normal, steady. He wasn't stumbling or acting erratic. That was the last confirmed sighting. No footage showed him re-entering the interior. No cameras caught him going back to his cabin. It was as if he had stepped into the night air and disappeared. One officer finally broke the silence. "Ma'am, it's possible he went overboard." Denise's knees buckled. She clutched the photo she'd been asked to provide, staring in disbelief. At 8 a.m., the intercom crackled. The captain's voice echoed across every cabin. "Attention passengers, we are conducting a man-overboard search. Please remain in public areas and avoid restricted decks while our crew performs emergency procedures." The ship slowed. Passengers crowded the rails, whispering, craning their necks to see the churning waters below. Massive spotlights swept the ocean. Crew members lined the decks with binoculars. Denise stood frozen, her hair whipping in the wind, screaming her husband's name into the endless horizon. "Mark, please, answer me!" Her voice was swallowed instantly by the roar of the engines and the waves. Within hours, the U.S. Coast Guard was involved. Helicopters circled overhead. Rescue boats cut through the waves, creating white froth against the endless blue. Passengers gathered in hushed clusters, watching, waiting. Some offered Denise sympathetic glances. Others avoided her eyes, whispering rumors. "I heard there was a fight on the balcony. Maybe he was drunk and leaned too far. Or maybe..." The whispers always trailed off, but Denise knew her husband. Something didn't add up. For 3 days, search teams scoured hundreds of square miles of ocean. Not a single trace. No life jacket, no clothing, no body, nothing. When the Carnival Victory finally docked in Miami, Denise disembarked alone. Her suitcase was heavier than ever, filled with Mark's untouched belongings. She was met by investigators, lawyers, and reporters, but no answers. At home, she searched tirelessly online, joining forums where families shared similar stories, husbands, wives, children who vanished at sea. Some fell, some jumped. Others were never explained at all. Every night she replayed his last smile in her mind. That casual wave goodbye outside the casino. She couldn't accept that in less than an hour, he had gone from playing blackjack to becoming another name on a list of disappearances the cruise industry seldom talks about. Years later, Denise still avoids the ocean. She says the sound of waves brings her to tears. She never remarried. And Mark? His name remains carved into the long, chilling record of passengers who board a ship full of joy and vanish into the unforgiving dark. Disappearing into thin air is terrifying enough, but sometimes the danger isn't about being lost at sea. It's about who might be standing just outside your cabin door. Our next story proves that the crew members you trust the most can sometimes be the very ones you should fear. In August 2017, Claire decided to take her first solo vacation after a painful divorce. She booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise on the Norwegian Dawn, hoping the sea breeze, sunshine, and endless distractions would help her heal. Friends had told her cruising alone was safe, security everywhere, staff trained for every situation, thousands of other passengers always nearby. At first, it was perfect. She read by the pool, explored the ship's bars, and took long walks on the open deck at night, marveling at how the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. The freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her life again. But by the third night, that sense of freedom began to twist into something far darker. It was around 10 p.m., when Claire returned from dinner in St. Thomas. She struggled with her key card. No matter how many times she swiped it, the cabin door refused to open. Frustrated, she muttered under her breath. That's when a young crew member appeared at the end of the hallway. He was tall, mid-20s, dark-haired, with a name tag that read Marco. Smiling, he walked over. "Need some help?" he asked in a thick accent. He took the card, and with a practiced angle, the door clicked open instantly. Claire laughed nervously. "Guess you're better at this than me." Marco grinned. "I know all the secrets. I've worked on ships 8 years. As she stepped inside, he leaned casually against the doorframe, blocking her way. "You travel alone, yes? I clean your room every day. Only one person's things." The way he said it made Claire's skin prickle. She forced a polite smile. "Yes, just me. Thanks again." He finally moved aside, but not before his eyes lingered too long on her. The next day, she tried to convince herself it was nothing, just friendliness misinterpreted. But when she returned to her cabin, she noticed something unsettling. Her clothes, which she'd left scattered, were neatly folded. Her underwear, previously stuffed in her suitcase, was arranged in precise stacks, and her private journal, hidden at the bottom of her bag, now sat in plain sight on the desk. Her stomach sank. Someone had gone through her belongings. That night, as she returned from a show, Marco was waiting outside her cabin, pretending to organize towels on his housekeeping cart. "Ah, perfect timing," he said. "I wanted to see you again." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It must be lonely, yes? Watching shows alone, eating alone. Maybe tomorrow night I keep you company. I know private places on ship. Very romantic." Claire's heart raced. She shook her head firmly. "No, I'm fine traveling alone. Please move." But Marco didn't budge. His expression darkened. "American women always think they are too good. That's okay. I can wait." She slipped past him and slammed her door shut, bolting every lock. On the other side, she heard him laugh softly before walking away. Over the next 2 days, Marco was everywhere, watching her at the pool, standing near her table in the dining room, appearing in hallways whenever she walked alone. Each time, his smile stretched wider, more menacing, and her cabin, every time she returned, something was off. Toiletries rearranged, clothes moved. Once she found a note tucked into her journal. "Soon." She reported him to guest services. The woman at the desk nodded politely, then said, "Our crew are thoroughly screened. Sometimes cultural differences cause misunderstandings. Don't worry, ma'am." It felt like they didn't believe her. But that night, at 3 a.m., her door beeped. The handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Again and again, she heard the distinctive swipe of a master key card. The only thing keeping them out was the interior security latch. She sat frozen in bed, every nerve screaming. After 10 long minutes, the attempts stopped. The next morning, Claire demanded to speak with ship security. This time, a stern officer named Captain Rodriguez listened closely as she recounted everything. The stalking, the tampering, the attempted entry. Her jaw clenched as she delivered the words. "He has a master key. He tried to get into my room at 3 in the morning. Do you understand what that means?" Captain Rodriguez's face hardened. She promised to investigate immediately. Within hours, Marco was confronted. At first, he denied everything. But when they searched his quarters, the truth spilled out. Hidden under his bed were dozens of photos of Claire, taken at the pool, in restaurants, walking the decks. There were also intimate items stolen from her cabin. Worse, there were similar trophies from other female passengers. Marco was confined to his room and handed over to the authorities when the ship docked in Miami. Claire was offered a free future cruise and an apology from management. But nothing could undo what happened. She returned home shaken, her trust shattered. She never cruised again. To this day, she checks hotel rooms obsessively, double locks doors, and never leaves personal items unattended. The part that haunts her most isn't to Marco's behavior. It is how easily he was able to invade her privacy. How a single master key gave him access to her most vulnerable space. At sea, surrounded by thousands of strangers, she had learned a terrifying truth. Sometimes the real danger isn't the ocean. It's who has a key to your door. If being stalked by someone with access to your private space sounds like a nightmare, imagine suddenly realizing the ship itself can't protect you when your life is on the line. The next account reveals the harsh truth about how fragile medical care can be in the middle of the ocean. In November 2020, at the height of the pandemic, David and his wife, Patricia, finally decided they needed a break. Both of them were essential workers. He was a paramedic, she an ICU nurse, and the months of trauma and exhaustion had nearly broken them. When cruise lines began sailing again at reduced capacity, they booked a 14-day transatlantic trip aboard the Celebrity Eclipse, hoping the open ocean would offer peace. The ship was far from full. Normally carrying close to 3,000 passengers, it now held just over 1,200. The atmosphere felt eerily calm. No long lines, no crowded buffets, no chaotic deck parties. For David and Patricia, it was bliss. Their balcony cabin on Deck 7 overlooked the endless Atlantic, and for the first few days they felt something they hadn't in months: relief. But by the 6th day at sea, that relief was shattered. It was just after lunch in the Ocean Cafe when it happened. A man in his 60s, Robert, traveling with his wife Patricia, was walking back to his table with a plate of food when he suddenly collapsed to the floor. At first, people thought he had tripped. But David and his wife recognized the signs instantly: gray skin, shallow breathing, a hand clutched to the chest. Patricia dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with me!" Robert's wife sobbed beside him. He has heart problems. Please help him." David checked his pulse. It was weak, erratic. "Massive cardiac event," he muttered. "He needs advanced care. Now." Within minutes, the ship's medical team arrived, 2 nurses and a young physician named Dr. Martinez. They loaded Robert onto a stretcher and rushed him to the medical center on Deck 2. David and Patricia followed, their instincts as medical professionals pulling them along. The medical facility was larger than Patricia expected, but still, it wasn't a hospital. A few beds, basic monitors, limited medications. No operating rooms, no advanced equipment. Dr. Martinez worked quickly, placing oxygen, administering nitroglycerin, starting an IV, but his face betrayed his worry. He pulled David aside. "He needs a cath lab, a bypass, maybe stents. We don't have those capabilities." David knew what that meant. Time was against them. The captain made the call to divert toward the Azores, the nearest port with a cardiac facility. But they were more than 18 hours away. Inside the small medical ward, Robert lay pale and sweating, clinging to life. His wife held his hand, whispering prayers. Patricia and David tried to comfort her, though they knew the odds. Hours dragged on. Crew brought blankets, water, reassurances. Passengers whispered through the halls about the emergency. For many, it was a sobering reminder. These ships were not floating hospitals. By nightfall, Robert's condition worsened. His breathing grew shallow, his pulse fainter. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "If we were on land, he'd already be in surgery," she whispered. "Here, he's dying." At 2 a.m., alarms blared. Robert went into full cardiac arrest. Nurses scrambled with defibrillators, chest compressions, adrenaline injections. His wife screamed, clutching the bed rail as Patricia tried to hold her back. Dr. Martinez's voice was steady but desperate. 1, 2, 3, clear." The defibrillator jolted Robert's body. Nothing. Again. Nothing. For 40 minutes they fought. Sweat dripped from their brows, but the inevitable came. At 2:47 a.m., Dr. Martinez lowered his head. Time of death, 02:47. His wife's wail filled the ward, a raw, animalistic grief that echoed down the empty corridor. David had seen many deaths in his career, but here, on this ship, it felt crueler, preventable. The ship's morgue was small, hidden deep below decks. That was where Robert's body was taken. His wife had to make the impossible choice: disembark in the Azores, alone and broken, or continue the journey to Southampton with her husband's body stored in cold silence just below. She chose to stay. Passengers avoided the subject, but everyone knew. The festive cruise had become somber. Even the evening shows felt hollow, as though the entire ship was haunted by one man's absence. Patricia couldn't stop replaying the night in her mind. In an ICU, Robert might have survived. With a cath lab, proper intervention, he had a chance. But on a cruise ship, his fate was sealed the moment his heart gave out. Later, lawsuits were filed. Claims that the cruise line exaggerated their medical readiness, that better preparation could have saved lives. None of it mattered to Robert's widow. She had come aboard with her husband. She left with his ashes. For David and Patricia, the experience changed everything. They'd boarded in search of peace, but instead they were reminded of the ocean's cruel truth. Out here, you are far from help. Ships can pamper you with Broadway shows, gourmet meals, endless drinks. But when life turns fragile, the nearest hospital might be hundreds of miles away. Patricia never cruised again. She says every time she hears advertisements promising luxury and safety at sea, she thinks of Robert's final breath, the helpless cries of his wife, and the sound of a defibrillator echoing uselessly in the night. On land, he might have lived. At sea, the ocean claimed him. While medical emergencies expose the limits of safety at sea, nature has its own way of reminding us who's in control. Our next story shows what happens when a luxury cruise ship is swallowed by a storm that no amount of engineering can hold back. In October 2016, Rachel and her boyfriend Daniel booked what they thought would be a perfect getaway, a 7-day repositioning cruise aboard the Norwegian Breakaway. The ship was moving from New York down to Fort Lauderdale for the winter season, and the fare was unbelievably cheap. They imagined crisp autumn sunsets, warm ocean breezes, and a romantic week together. When the massive ship pulled away from Manhattan, gliding past the Statue of Liberty, Rachel thought it was the beginning of a dream. But 2 nights later, that dream became their worst nightmare. The first day at sea was calm. Passengers lounged by the pool, drank cocktails, and explored the ship's 18 decks of restaurants, theaters, and attractions. Rachel loved the balcony cabin they'd booked, Deck 10, starboard side, with an endless view of the Atlantic. But by the second night, the ship began to sway more violently. Glasses rattled in the bars. Passengers stumbled in the hallways. Crew members whispered about a storm off the Carolinas, but the captain's announcement downplayed it. "We're expecting some rough weather, ladies and gentlemen, but nothing the Breakaway can't handle." Still, by dinner, the wind was howling, and the waves were climbing higher. At midnight, Rachel and Daniel tried to sleep, but the ship suddenly lurched so violently that they were thrown out of bed. Their balcony door, which had been locked, blew open with a deafening crack. Freezing salt water slammed into their cabin, soaking the carpet and knocking over furniture. Rachel screamed, "Close it, Daniel! Close it!" The two of them fought against hurricane-force winds to shove the door shut, water stinging their eyes. By the time it locked, several inches of seawater covered their floor. Outside, the storm raged. Waves as tall as houses crashed against the hull. The ship groaned like a living creature in pain. At 3 a.m., the intercom crackled. The captain's voice, usually calm and professional, carried a tremor. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a severe nor'easter. For your safety, please remain in your cabins. Do not attempt to go onto open decks under any circumstances." Rachel clutched Daniel's arm. Did he sound scared? Daniel, did he sound scared? Daniel didn't answer. His silence said enough. Around 4:00 a.m., it happened. A thunderous boom echoed deep inside the ship, followed by the metallic screech of something tearing apart. Then, the lights flickered and died. Suddenly, they were in total darkness. The engines, which had been a constant reassuring hum, went silent. The ship was adrift. In the corridor, passengers screamed. One man pounded on his door, shouting he was locked inside because the electronic locks had failed. Children cried in the darkness. The emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a dim red glow like a horror film. Rachel whispered, shaking, "We're going to sink, aren't we?" Daniel pulled her close. "Don't say that. Just don't say that." For the next 6 hours, the breakaway was tossed like a toy. The ship listed so severely that everything not bolted down crashed across the cabin floors. Plates shattered in kitchens, luggage rolled through hallways. In some areas, water poured in through broken windows. Crew members rushed from cabin to cabin, telling passengers to stay put. But their faces betrayed the truth. They were just as terrified. At one point, Rachel and Daniel crawled on their hands and knees just to reach the bathroom. Standing was impossible. Every roll of the ship threatened to send them crashing into walls. The cries of other passengers echoed through the thin walls. A woman sobbing prayers, a child wailing for his mother. Somewhere down the corridor, a man shouted, "We're not gonna make it!" When morning came, Rachel and Daniel opened their balcony curtains to a sight burned into their memories forever. Waves towering 30 feet high, black and furious, slamming into the ship as if determined to tear it apart. The breakaway climbed each wall of water, the horizon tilting at impossible angles. From the peaks, they could see miles of churning gray ocean. In the troughs, they were swallowed whole. Nothing but mountains of water on every side. At 7 a.m., the emergency generators finally kicked in. Lights flickered back on. The engines sputtered weakly. The captain's voice returned, but this time it carried raw fear. "We've sustained damage to several systems. Please remain calm and stay in your cabins until further notice. We are doing everything we can." The storm raged for nearly 18 more hours. Dozens of passengers were injured, broken bones, concussions, cuts from flying glass. Furniture was ripped off decks and hurled into the sea. Flooding forced entire sections of the ship to be closed. When the storm finally broke and the ship limped into Fort Lauderdale 2 days late, passengers disembarked in silence. The hull was dented, windows shattered, railings twisted like toys. Rachel kissed the ground when her feet touched solid land. She vowed never to cruise again. Later investigations revealed the storm had intensified faster than forecasts predicted. Officially, the ship remained within safety parameters, but passengers knew better. Rachel still remembers the sound of that explosion in the night. The silence when the engines died, the way the ship tilted so far she thought it would capsize. She tells friends, "They sell you the dream of paradise, but out there the ocean doesn't care, and when a storm decides to find you, all that steel and technology means nothing. You're just a speck waiting to be swallowed." Surviving a storm may leave you shaken, but some of the most disturbing experiences at sea come from the waves. They come from the people sailing beside you. In the next account, a seemingly friendly couple turns a dream cruise into a psychological trap. In June 2018, Mike and his wife Laura booked a 10-day anniversary cruise to Alaska aboard the Celebrity Solstice. For years, they had dreamed of watching glaciers calve into icy waters, spotting whales along the inside passage, and sharing quiet evenings together on their balcony cabin. They spent months saving for this trip, telling themselves it would be a second honeymoon after years of stress and long work schedules. The first few days were exactly what they'd imagined. Elegant dinners, breathtaking scenery, and a ship filled with calm, middle-aged couples enjoying the slower pace of an Alaskan voyage. But on the third day, everything began to change. At lunch in the Ocean View Cafe, they were seated next to an older couple, Dale and Susan Henderson. At first, they seemed harmless. Dale was a tall, broad man with graying hair and a booming voice that dominated the table. Susan was quieter, smaller, her eyes darting nervously, yet she stared at Laura with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Where are you two from?" Dale asked loudly, cutting into his steak. "Seattle," Mike replied. "It's our 15th anniversary trip." Susan's lips curled into a faint smile. She reached out, lightly touching Laura's hand. "15th anniversary," she whispered. "That's wonderful. You look so young, about the age our daughter would be." Laura pulled her hand away awkwardly, laughing politely. She noticed that Susan never broke eye contact, her gaze fixed like she was memorizing Laura's face. Over the next 2 days, no matter where Laura and Mike went, the Hendersons appeared. At the evening show, they sat directly behind them. At the pool, they claimed the chairs across. Even in specialty restaurants, the Hendersons somehow found a table in sight. Mike brushed it off. "Ships aren't that big. You're bound to see the same people." But Laura knew it wasn't coincidence. She could feel Susan's eyes following her every move. And at dinner one night, Susan leaned close, speaking so softly only Laura could hear. "You even laugh like her." When the ship docked in Juneau, Mike and Laura booked a whale-watching excursion. As they waited for their bus, Laura stepped away from Mike to adjust her bag. Suddenly, Susan was at her side, standing far too close. Laura caught the sickly sweet smell of her perfume before hearing her whisper, "You remind me so much of my daughter. She would have been about your age now, if she'd lived." Laura froze. Susan's eyes were wide, glassy with unshed tears. "When I watch you," she continued, "sometimes I forget you're not her. It feels like she's come back." Before Laura could answer, Mike returned, and Susan instantly switched back to cheerful small talk, as if the moment hadn't happened at all. From that day forward, Susan's behavior became invasive. She found excuses to touch Laura's arm, brush her hair back, even hold her hand during meals. "Don't be shy, sweetie," she whispered once. "Mommy just wants to love you." Laura recoiled. But Dale would quickly draw Mike into loud conversations, leaving Susan free to hover closer. The breaking point came on their 7th morning, while Mike and Laura sipped coffee on their balcony, watching glaciers drift by. When Mike pointed out movement on the balcony next door, they froze. Dale stood with binoculars, watching them. "Morning, neighbors!" he shouted cheerfully over the roar of the ocean. "Beautiful sunrise, isn't it?" Then, Susan appeared beside him. When she saw Laura in her pajamas, her face lit with disturbing delight. "Oh, honey," she called out, "you look so beautiful in the morning light, just like my daughter. Would you mind if I take some pictures? For memories?" Laura bolted inside, slamming the balcony door shut. That afternoon, Laura reported the couple to guest services. But the staff's response was frustrating. "As long as they're not physically harming you, there's little we can do," the woman behind the counter explained. "It's inappropriate, yes, but unless there's a threat, our hands are tied." Laura stared at her in disbelief. "They're stalking me. She called herself my mother. Isn't that a threat?" But nothing changed. On the 8th night, the main dining room was packed for formal dinner. Despite requesting a table far from the Hendersons, Mike and Laura found them seated across the room. Susan's eyes locked on Laura all evening. Halfway through dinner, Susan excused herself. Moments later, Laura felt the urge to go, too. Against her better judgment, she told Mike she'd be fine. When she pushed open the bathroom door, Susan was waiting, standing by the sink, smiling. "Finally, we can talk alone," she whispered, blocking the exit. "You don't understand how much you mean to me. God brought you to me. You're her. You're my daughter. You belong with us." Her trembling hands reached for Laura's face. "Come home with us. Her room is still waiting. Her clothes, her makeup. You can be her now. We can be a family again." Laura shoved past her, heart racing, and fled back to the dining room. "We need to leave, now," she hissed to Mike. The last 2 days of the cruise, Mike and Laura hid in their cabin, ordering room service, avoiding all public areas. But even there, they heard knocking down the hall, Susan's sing-song voice drifting through, "Sweetie, don't hide from Mommy." When they finally disembarked in Seattle, the Hendersons were there in the terminal. Susan sobbed hysterically, clinging to Dale, crying that she was losing her daughter all over again. Mike grabbed Laura's hand and didn't stop walking until they were outside the building. The experience destroyed their romantic anniversary. Laura returned home shaken, unable to shake the feeling of Susan's clammy hands or Dale's watchful binoculars. She later said, "It wasn't just predatory, it was delusional. They didn't see me as me. They saw me as a ghost of their dead child. And being trapped with them on a ship with nowhere to run was the most terrifying part." To this day, Laura refuses to cruise again. Whenever she sees glossy brochures promising luxury at sea, she remembers Susan's whisper, "Mommy just wants to love you," and she shivers. When obsession turns dangerous, at least you can see it happening in front of you. But in our next story, the terror begins in the one place you were supposed to feel safe, your own cabin, when a stranger decides it's his to invade. In February 2021, Jessica and her college roommate Emily booked a much-needed girls' trip aboard Royal Caribbean's Symphony of the Seas. After a year of lockdowns, canceled plans, and endless Zoom calls, the idea of 7 carefree days in the Western Caribbean felt like salvation. The ship, normally carrying over 6,000 passengers, was sailing at reduced capacity due to pandemic restrictions. That meant shorter lines, open pool chairs, and a sense of exclusivity. Their cabin, a small interior room on Deck 8, was nothing special, but they didn't care. They planned to spend their days in the sun, drinking margaritas and forgetting the world's chaos. For the first 3 nights, it was exactly that. Laughter, cocktails, late-night shows, and stumbling back to their cabin in tipsy exhaustion. But on the 4th night, everything changed. They returned from shore excursions in Costa Maya, giggling and fumbling with their keycard after too many margaritas. The moment Emily pushed the door open, Jessica stopped cold. A smell hung in the air, sharp, musky, masculine cologne. "Do you smell that?" she whispered. Emily frowned, sniffing the air. "Yeah, that wasn't here this morning." The second thing they noticed was their belongings. Clothes that had been scattered lazily across the room were now neatly stacked. Their swimsuits and underwear were separated from everything else, folded with unsettling precision. Emily's laptop sat open on the desk, the screen still glowing. She hadn't left it that way. Jessica opened it, and her stomach dropped. "Emily, someone's been in your files." The browser history showed searches through her photos, her email, even private messages. They rushed to guest services, voices low but urgent. The young woman at the counter listened politely, but her smile never faltered. "Housekeeping has master keys," she explained smoothly. "Sometimes belongings get moved during service. And computers. Maybe you just forgot to close it?" Jessica slammed her hand on the counter. "My underwear was laid out like a display. Do you think housekeeping does that?" The staff member hesitated, then sighed. "I'll send security to your cabin." That night, a uniformed officer named Martinez appeared. He walked the room, made notes, but shook his head. Without proof of theft, there's little we can do. Thousands of crew have access, nearly impossible to narrow down. Jessica wanted to scream. The next afternoon, they returned from lunch to find the violation had escalated. Their dirty laundry pile had been rifled through, underwear sorted, and worse, several pairs missing. Emily collapsed onto the bed, shaking. "They're taking them. They're actually taking them." Jessica's face hardened. "We're catching him. Tonight." They devised a desperate plan. Jessica would hide in the bathroom while Emily went to dinner, leaving the room looking empty. If the intruder came back, they'd finally know who it was. At 8:30 p.m., the door beeped. Jessica froze, holding her breath. The man who entered wasn't crew. He was a passenger, mid-50s, khaki shorts, polo shirt. He moved with confidence, as though this wasn't his first time. Jessica watched through the crack in the door as he rummaged through their suitcases, methodically selecting pieces of clothing and stuffing them into a bag. He even lifted their IDs from the nightstand and snapped photos with his phone. Before leaving, he scribbled something on a notepad and left it on Emily's pillow. Then he slipped out, casual as if he belonged. Jessica's hands shook as she called Emily back and dialed security. The paper read, "I know your routine. Breakfast at 9, pool deck by 11, back to cabin around 6. Call me when you want to have some real fun. Robert." Emily's face went pale. "He's been watching us." This time, Officer Martinez arrived with backup. They reviewed hallway cameras and quickly identified him. Robert Chen, 52, traveling alone from California. When they searched his cabin, what they found was horrifying. Drawers stuffed with women's underwear, trinkets, and personal items stolen from multiple passengers. Dozens of photos, taken without permission, lined his phone. Women by the pool, on balconies, even asleep in deck chairs. And worse, records showed a crew member had been bribed to supply Chen with master key cards, giving him unrestricted access to cabins. Chen was confined to his cabin until they reached Miami, where FBI agents were waiting. The corrupt crew member was fired and handed over to authorities. Jessica and Emily received apologies, a refund, and an offer of a free future cruise. They declined. For the rest of the voyage, they barely slept. Jessica kept a chair braced against the door. Emily jumped at every sound in the hallway. When they finally disembarked, Jessica said, "Everyone thinks the danger is outside, in some port. But it was right here, in the cabin we trusted to be safe." To this day, she refuses to stay in any hotel without her own door alarm and camera. Emily avoids cruises altogether, because what was sold as paradise felt more like a hunting ground, and they had been the prey. Violations of privacy are horrifying, but what if the entire ship itself fails? Our final story takes us to the middle of the Atlantic, where a sudden power failure left thousands drifting helplessly in complete darkness at the mercy of the sea. In September 2019, brothers Tom and Eric decided to take their first real trip together since college. Both had recently gone through divorces, and when Tom suggested a 12-day transatlantic cruise aboard the Queen Mary II, Eric thought it was the perfect chance to reconnect. The Queen Mary II wasn't some floating amusement park. It was a classic ocean liner built to handle the rough Atlantic. Elegant dining halls, daily lectures, formal teas, everything about it felt timeless, like stepping into the golden age of sea travel. For the first 3 days, it was perfect. Whiskey in the Commodore Club, lectures on astronomy, quiet nights watching the waves. The brothers joked about how they felt like characters in an old film. But on the 4th day, in the middle of the Atlantic, something went wrong. It started small. At lunch in the Britannia restaurant, the chandeliers flickered, just for a second, but enough that conversations paused. The hum of the engines changed pitch, stuttering like a heartbeat skipping. Later, during an afternoon lecture in the ship's planetarium, the lights flickered again. Longer this time. Passengers murmured. The lecturer hesitated, glancing upward before continuing. By dinner, the air conditioning was cycling unpredictably. Some rooms stifling, others freezing. The elevators stalled mid-floor, trapping passengers for minutes at a time. Tom leaned across the table, whispering to Eric, "Something's wrong. You feel it?" Eric nodded. Engines don't just change sound like that. At 10 p.m., Captain Williams's voice came over the intercom. Usually calm, tonight it was taut. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor electrical issues. You may notice power fluctuations. Please rest assured, all safety systems remain operational. There's no cause for concern." But the way he stressed minor and no cause for concern sent a chill down Eric's spine. Around midnight, Eric and Tom were sipping drinks in the Commodore Club when everything plunged into darkness. The music stopped. Conversation died. The ship's engines fell silent. For the first time since they'd boarded, the ship felt dead. Passengers screamed in the sudden dark. Glass shattered. Somewhere a child cried out. Then dim red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in an eerie glow. Eric whispered, "The engines, they're gone." Tom's hand gripped his arm. "This is bad. Really bad." Crew members rushed through corridors, shouting in multiple languages. Over the PA system, a voice stuttered through static. "Attention! Experiencing power failure. Remain. Do not attempt to." The announcement cut off. The silence where the engine's steady vibration should have been was unbearable. On a ship, engines weren't just propulsion, they were life support. Lights, heat, water, sanitation, communications. Without them, the Queen Mary II was nothing more than a massive coffin drifting in the cold Atlantic. Passengers began to panic. A woman sobbed into her hands. Someone shouted, "Are we sinking? Tell us if we're sinking." By 2 a.m., the temperature had dropped sharply. Passengers wrapped themselves in blankets, huddling in corridors. Toilets stopped working. Water pressure failed. The brothers tried to remain calm, but when they heard banging and frantic shouts from lower decks, they realized chaos was spreading. Crew tried to reassure people, but whispers traveled fast. Backup generators failed too. At 3 a.m., Captain Williams's voice finally returned, grim and stripped of any calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must be honest. We have suffered a complete failure of our electrical generation systems. We are running on emergency batteries only, with approximately 18 hours of power remaining. We have issued a distress signal." Eric felt the blood drain from his face. 18 hours? And then what? Tom's voice was a whisper. Then nothing. Morning came, but with no working kitchens, food was reduced to ration packs and bottled water. Crew dragged emergency supplies into lounges where frightened passengers waited. The waste systems overflowed. The elegant carpeted hallways reeked. People clutched one another, whispering prayers. Eric watched frost form on the inside of their cabin window. The Atlantic cold was seeping in. He thought about how vast and merciless the ocean was, and how small even this enormous ship felt without power. With only 2 hours of battery left, engineers managed to restart a single backup generator. It was enough to restore minimal lighting, partial air circulation, and, most importantly, satellite communications. Nearby commercial vessels responded. Over the next 4 days, teams of engineers shuttled supplies and worked around the clock to stabilize the systems. Finally, limping and battered, the Queen Mary 2 crawled into New York Harbor 5 days late. Later investigations revealed a cascading electrical failure triggered by a flaw in the ship's power management system, something no one had anticipated. Something that shut down both primary and backup systems simultaneously. Passengers were offered compensation, but Tom and Eric couldn't shake what they'd lived through. Eric put it best. You don't realize until you're out there that all this luxury, all this steel, all this technology, it only works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you're nothing but a speck of metal drifting in an endless, uncaring sea. And there you have it. 7 disturbing true cruise ship horror stories. From vanishings and stalkers to storms, obsessions, and catastrophic failures, these accounts remind us that the open ocean is as dangerous as it is beautiful. Next time you see a glossy advertisement for a perfect getaway at sea, remember, the ocean keeps its secrets, and paradise can turn into a nightmare without warning. If you enjoyed tonight's voyage into the unknown, subscribe to EERIE Echoes, tap the notification bell, and share in the comments which story haunted you the most. Until next time, keep your lights on, keep your doors locked, and remember, the ocean is watching.